Okay, good evening, everybody. My host, can you confirm you can hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
All right, thank you. I want to welcome you guys to today's lecture on financial reporting. Grace, I'm late. Okay, sorry about that. It's just about 1 minute lateness, right? I was coming from corporate reporting class, right? So I needed to take some water so that I can have energy to take this class. So I've been taking 4 hours straight lecture since we started every night except Thursdays, right? Okay, so I think we're able to conclude leases yesterday, and we started IFRS 13 fair value measurement. Okay, so because of time, I don't know, I will not be able to do recap on leases. Maybe some other time, and I go back there, right? Because I think we used about 2 classes to do leases. So let's just go straight to IFRS 13. So yesterday we talked about IFRS 13. So we have actually looked at uh, the meaning of fair value. We said fair value is a price that will be received to sell an asset or paid to transfer a liability in an orderly transaction between market participants at a measurement date. So I spent a lot of time explaining what that means. And we said normally the market participants are knowledgeable people, okay, and they consider the condition, the location, and the restriction on use when it comes to trying to determine the fair value. Okay. Then I think we also looked at the approaches, if you can remember. Before now, sorry, before now, when we came across fair value, if you can remember, I think under IS 36, impairment of assets, under IFRS 5, we came across fair value, if you can remember, when we said under IS 36, when its kind amount exceed its recoverable amount. I would say recoverable amount of an asset is the higher of fair value, okay? Higher of fair value, less cost to sell and value in use. So we keep coming across fair value. Shortly, we are going to do, what do they call it? IS 16, property, plant and equipment. And IS 40, you still see fair value coming on board, okay? So, and there is a standard that regulates or that gives guidance on measurement of fair value. So at that point, I told you that anytime you see the word fair value, just think of the market value so that you can easily relate with it. So I'm going to take you further on that. Okay. So we said one of the valuation technique is the market approach, which we have been seeing before now. For example, you base your market valuation, you base your asset valuation on recent sales price. So that's what we call market approach. And the second one is cost approach. Okay, cost approach. That talks about replacement cost. Replacement cost. Okay, we want to replace those assets, or maybe you have some similar assets. What will be the replacement cost? Then we also have the income approach. Okay, income approach based on financial forecast. So this will require the entity to do what we call cash flow forecast. Okay, so based on that, they might be able to determine their fair value. So I'm still going to break this down when we get to the fair value hierarchy. Okay, I'm sure some of you are taking this standard for the first time. Okay, probably because it's quite new in the syllabus. Okay, it's I think it's IFRS 13 and IS 41 that was added to your syllabus. Okay, and we are taking IS 41, so we needed to also take the standard. Sorry, we needed to also take this standard. So let's continue. Okay, I think we also discussed this, if I remember. That is which circumstance do we use fair value? Okay, we use it on initial recognition. So if you remember under S41, we said biological assets are measured at fair value, even initially at fair value, less cost to sell. So if you remember that, okay, and even under IFRS 3 business combination, okay, the identifiable net asset acquired at the date of acquisition must also be measured at fair value for the purpose of determining goodwill. Okay, so you're still going to come across it by the time we start your group accounting. Okay, now then you can also use fair value on recurring basis. What does that mean? That means you apply it almost every year. Okay, that's what I mean by recurring basis. So if you look at what's it called? If you look at IAS 40, for example, on subsequent measurements, IAS 40 requires that an entity can either use cost model or fair value model. So if they use fair value model, they must apply it to all class of all classes of fair value, investment property rather. They must apply the fair value to all classes of investment property, and it has to be measured with consistency. Okay, for example, IAS 40 says maybe every 3 years, every 5 years. Okay, sometimes it has to be every year. Okay, so that is recurring basis. And the last one is non-recurring basis. Okay, so what do you mean by non-recurring basis? Maybe once, just once. For example, under IFRS 5. Okay, so if you remember, under IFRS 5, what did we say? Assets classified as held for sale are measured at the lower of their carrying amount and fair value less cost to sell. Okay, if you can remember. Okay, so when you now say lower of carrying amount and fair value, so IFRS 5 is just once. Okay, except you didn't sell that asset within the next 1 year. That's why you may need to. Okay, so that's a non-recurring base. So those are the base. So at your level, the examiner can ask you this. If I'm taking corporate reporting now, I'll tell them they should not bother about this. But at financial reporting level, they can ask you which circumstances can fair value be applied. So all you need to tell the examiner is on initial recognition, on recurring basis, and on non-recurring basis. So you need to be able to, you need to be able to explain that to the examiner. So it's pretty key. Okay. Now, reasons for the issue of IFRS 13. I think that's where we stopped yesterday. Okay, if I'm correct. Okay. So number one, to standardize the definition of fair value. Okay. So if you remember my explanation yesterday, because we have been coming across fair value, fair value, fair value. Okay. So we needed to have a standard on the definition, okay, and to also help users providing additional disclosure relating to how fair value has been determined. Then fair value is also there to improve the consistency of reported information, okay, to improve the consistency of reported information, and also to increase the extent of convergence between IFRS and the US GAAP. So you might also require to know that. Now, the basis of fair value measurement, everything we are going to discuss now has those bases. So I will not be explaining it from here. Everything we're going to discuss here is summarized in the basis of fair value measurement. So you can go over that. I think we even looked at this question. Yeah, I think we looked at this question yesterday. Okay, we looked at a question yesterday, but for maybe some of us that might be joining us for the first time, so let's look at this question again. Baklava has an investment property that is measured at fair value. The property is rented out on short-term leases. Okay. Now, the directors wish to fair value the property by estimating the present value of the net cash flows that the property will generate for Baklava. They argue that this best reflects the way in which the building will generate economic benefit for Baklava. The building is unique, although there has been many sales of similar building in the local area. Now, required, discuss whether the valuation technique suggested by the directors complies with the International Financial Reporting Standard. Now, what is the examiner asking me? Okay, they're asking me a combination of two things. Number one, the valuation technique. Then technically, I'm supposed to talk about the fair value hierarchy. Okay, what do you mean by fair value hierarchy? I have not taught you, I'm aware. Okay, so but let's focus on the valuation technique that we have taught or we have learned. What is those valuation technique? Can you remember? Can you remember we have three valuation techniques? We have the market approach, okay? We talked about the current sales price, okay? We also have the cost approach. We talked about the replacement cost, okay? Then we also have the what's it called now? The income approach. We talked about the financial forecast, okay? Now the examiner is now asking me I should discuss whether the evaluation technique as suggested by the director complies with IFRS. So they did not tell me which IFRS, but how will I know that they are mentioning IFRS? The examiner already said Baklava has an investment property that is measured at fair value, okay? And the director wished to fair value that property. So when they wish to fair value the property, what did they do? They estimate the present value of the net cash flow. They simply did that forecast, which is the income approach. That is what they did, okay? So the question now is this income approach that the directors are suggesting, because they argue that this best reflects the way in which the building will generate economic benefit. So the question is, did they comply with IFRS 13? Obviously, no. Do you know why? Because we're told here that the building is unique, although there have been many sales of similar building in the local area. So the hierarchy should have been level 1 input. I've not taught you that, I know, but it simply means they should have used the market approach because there was a recent sales price of similar building, which can provide a reliable source of information as when it concerns the fair value of that building. So that's what they should have done. Okay, so if you look at the answer, what I've explained is there. Okay, so the directors estimate the future net cash flow of the building that the building will generate is level 3 input. Okay, so that's what you are saying. So don't worry, we are going to take the input shortly so that you understand better. So IFRS, I think this lower priority to level 3 input. So they should have used level 1 input. Level 1 input simply means the market price as well. Okay, so that means you look at the market price in an active market. Okay, that's the level 1 input. That's observable prices. When we get there, you understand better. Okay, so obviously the evaluation technique does not comply with IFRS 13. So I think that's where we stopped yesterday. Okay, that's where we stopped yesterday. So let's now start. So what is a market? Okay, we are going to look at the market. Market is divided into two. Principal market, that's number one. And number two is the headmaster market. No, it's not headmaster. So when you hear principal market, don't think number two is the headmaster. No, it's actually the most advantageous market. Okay, so when you talk about market, so don't expect the examiner to ask you what is a market. In case the examiner should ask you what is a market, you just tell the examiner that a market is a place where we buy goods and services. For example, we buy gari, we buy rice, we buy beans. Okay, so that's the market. Obviously, will never ask you what is a market as far as 13 is concerned. If they should ask you what is a market, when you come out of that exam, just call me and come and collect my 1 month salary. Okay, so nobody will ask you what is the market. Okay, so you don't need to bother yourself about that. Okay, but they can ask you to explain in an exam question or in a scenario-based question the difference between the principal market and the most advantageous market. So as far as 13 is concerned, we have two types of market. Number one is the principal market and the most advantageous market. So you need to be with me here. This is where you need to understand so that you will have to apply it when you are solving questions. Okay, you need to apply it when you are solving questions. Please give me 1 second. Let me just take water. Okay, I want to use all my strength and energy for this lecture, despite the fact that I've been lecturing since, right? Okay, so now what is the principal market? Now be with me here. Principal market is the market with the greatest level of activity for asset or liability that is being measured. Can I say that again? Principal market is the greatest level of activity for an asset or liability that is being measured. That may not make sense to you, but you need to put it in your head. So let me try to give you examples that you can relate with. If you are in Lagos, there is a market in Lagos. I'm sure some of you are not in Lagos, but maybe you have heard about this market before. That market is called Computer Village in Lagos, okay? It's at Ikeja. They call it Computer Village. Now, so what do you mean by a market with the greatest level of activity? So anytime you talk about phones or you talk about laptop and you really want to know the fair value, you have to, and you are looking for a principal market. You have to look for a market with the greatest volume of activity. So when it comes to what's it called, phone accessory, laptops, then you go to Computer Village in Lagos. That is the principal market. So you cannot compare the volume of transaction or the active the volume of activity when it relates to that particular asset. You can't compare with any other market in Lagos. You go to Abulegba in Lagos, where they also sell phone, okay, you may not really see the fair value. So what it simply means is this: if an entity wants to estimate the fair value of an asset or liability, they must make reference to the principal market. So what is the principal market? The principal market is the market with the greatest level of activity for the asset or liability that has been sold. You want to buy part for your car, okay? The best place probably you can go to where they have the greatest volume of activity is maybe Ladipo in Oshodi market, okay? That's the part for a car. If you want to buy lace material cotton, maybe you have to get to the island in Lagos, okay? So that's what I mean. So where you are, I'm just trying to give you all those scenarios so that you can play with it, so that you can reason with it, and you understand what I'm saying, okay? You know, I'm speaking English. I'm speaking in English language. So if you don't understand the English I'm saying, I might need to also explain in your language. So if I don't understand your language, you need to teach me your language first before I can now teach you your language, okay? But I want to believe you understand what I'm saying, right? So what you need to do is this. So you have to pick the key points that I'm trying to make. And the key point is this: when it comes to IFRS 13, don't forget, we have already said you have three approaches. It's either you use the market approach, or you use the income approach, or you use the cost approach, okay? Now in doing that, there are two types of market. The first market is the principal market, and the second one is the most advantageous market. That the principal market is the market with the highest level of activity for the asset or for the asset or liability that has been measured. So I just mentioned Computer Village in Lagos. I just mentioned Oshodi Market or Ladipo Market for spare parts. Okay. Now for an entity, you know, this is for an entity. I just mentioned those examples so that you can relate with it. So for an entity, maybe for your company, the principal market of company A may not be the principal market of company B, okay? For example, your company used to buy in China, they used to buy in India, and they used to buy in Australia. Their principal market out of those three will be the market with the greatest volume of activity or with the greatest level of activity, okay? So that's the principal market. Now, be with me here. If there is no principal market, okay, if there is no principal market, the entity can now make reference to an advantageous, the most advantageous market. So the entity can make reference to the most advantageous market. Now, under principal market, transaction costs are ignored. Transaction costs are ignored under principal market. If you understand this principle, you are good to go. Now, the most advantageous market is the market that will maximize the net amount that will be received to sell an asset or minimize the amount that will be paid to transfer a liability. That is what we call the most advantageous market. Now you need to be with me here. Let me say that again. The most advantageous market. Everything is in your notes. Everything I'm saying is in your notes, okay? The most advantageous market is the market with the that maximizes the net amount that will be received when selling an asset or paid or minimize the amount that will be paid when transferring a liability. That's what we call the most advantageous market. So in your most advantageous market, you may consider transaction cost, but you don't adjust it when you are getting your what's it called? When you are getting your fair value. Can I say that again? You can consider. You know, under principal market, you ignore transaction cost. Why? IFRS 13 says transaction cost is a characteristic of that market. It is not a characteristic of the asset itself. So you ignore it. But under most advantageous market, you can consider transaction cost, but you will not adjust it from the net fair value that you're going to get. You will not adjust it. That means you will not remove it. Okay, now you have to be with me. I want to explain one concept again. Anytime an entity wants to estimate fair value, they must make reference to the principal market. So in an exam question, the examiner should give you the principal market. The examiner also give you the most advantageous market. Okay, what it simply means that reference must be made to the principal market. But if you are given two markets, neither of them is a principal market, then you are now going to look at the most advantageous market. So what is now the most advantageous market? The market that maximizes the net amount that will be received when selling an asset or pay, or that minimize the amount that will be paid when transferring a liability. And that is all. You can grab that, you're fine. The next one is what's it called? Fair value hierarchy, and that's the end of IFRS 13. Okay, it's as simple as that. So let's see. Okay, everything I've explained is there. Can you see? Okay, can you see? So the most advantageous market is okay. So that's what I've just explained, right? And you also have the transaction cost. Okay, they will play a role in deciding the most advantageous market. However, the fair value is not adjusted for those transactions because they are characteristics of the market rather than the assets. Okay, so let's look at this exercise to demonstrate our what's it called? Our understanding. Okay. Let's see. An asset is sold in two different active markets at different prices. An entity enters into transactions in both markets and can assess the price in those markets for the assets at the measurement date as follows. So we have the price, the transaction cost, transport cost, net price received. Require. What is the fair value of the asset? A, if market one is the principal market for the asset. Then B, there is no principal market. That means no principal market can be determined. Okay, so when I see a question like this, when I see market one, the examiner is already telling me here, if you see the requirement, what is the fair value? So IFRS 13 is flashing me. Okay, IFRS 13 is calling me. So what they want me to do is, if market one is the principal market, what would be the fair value? Then I remember that my principal market is the market. How do we define what's it called? Our principal market. Can you remember? We define our principal market, or our principal market was explained as the market with the greatest level of activity. Okay, but in this question, we were not given the activity. Activity simply means sales or volume. Okay, but we are not giving. All we are given is price, transport costs, and transaction costs. That's what we are giving. But the examiner has already given us an hint by saying you assume that the market one is the principal market. Don't forget, I also explained that IFRS 13 also says that when you are trying to estimate your fair value, making reference to the principal market, transaction costs are completely ignored. Transaction costs are ignored. So if market one is my principal market, all I need to do is this. And I need to calculate my fair value. My price is 26. What is the transaction cost? 3. I will ignore it. I will ignore the transaction cost. That means I will not consider it at all. I will now go to transport cost, which is 2. So I will now say 2 minus 26. It will give me 24. So 24 is my fair value, provided market one is the principal market. So 24 is my fair value. That's it. That's what you are doing. Ignore transaction cost, then you do the rest. Okay. Then, this is very simple, right? Then there is no principal market. Okay. There is no principal market. Now you have to be with me again. I have explained the concept, but we are trying to apply it in a question. So the examiner is now telling me that between market 1 and market 2, there is no principal market. So when there is no principal market, the second market will now call me. What is the second market? The most advantageous market. How did you define most advantageous market? It's a market that maximizes the net amount that will be received to sell an asset. Okay, so I now look at both markets. Which of them is giving me the highest value? Market 1 is giving me 21, and market 2 is giving me 22. So obviously, market 2 is the most advantageous market. But don't forget again that when you are considering your most advantageous market, you can consider, okay, you can consider transaction costs, but you don't adjust them. Okay, so if I look at again, if I look, they will play a role. The transaction cost here is 3, and the transaction cost here is 1. So the transaction cost here is lower. So my ultimate net, what's it called, fair value will now be 23. By the time I remove 25 from my 2, so to be 23. But when I look at the net amount that will be received by like this, market 2 is the most advantageous market because it maximizes the net amount that will be received, and that's the end of the question. So can you see now? So if market 1 is the principal market, the fair value will now be measured using the price that will be received in the market less transport cost, not transaction cost. Okay, because transaction costs are ignored. So that's why you have this 24 there. Okay, and can you see transaction costs are ignored because they are not a characteristic of the asset. Okay, so that is it. So you now go to the B part of the question. So if neither of the market is a principal market, then the asset value will be measured in the most advantageous market. So the most advantageous market is the market that maximizes the net amount that will be received from the sale. So the net amount is 22. Can you see? Which is higher than market 1. So market 2 is therefore the most advantageous market. Okay. So the resulting fair value will now be 23. Can you see now? So the resulting fair value will now be 23 because we will not consider the transaction cost, but it will play a role in deciding the net amount that will be received. Okay, so that is it. That is it. That is it. It's as simple as that. Okay, so let me now take you fair value hierarchy, and after this one, then we say bye bye to what's it called? We say bye bye to IAS. What's it called? IFRS 3. Okay, so that is it. Okay, so let's look at fair value hierarchy. Okay, now fair value hierarchy. In order to maximize verifiability as well as increase comparability, so IFRS 13 now states that an entity should maximize the use of observable input when determining fair value. So remember, we have valuation approaches the other time. Okay, so this is in addition to those valuation approach. So it's not giving us hierarchy. What are the things we need to consider first? If we cannot see that first, then we go to the second. If you cannot see the second, we now go to the third. That's what we call hierarchy. Okay, and we have 3 levels. Okay, we have 3 input levels. We have level 1 input, we have level 2 input, and we have level 3 input. So in case the examiner should ask you, what are the principles contained under IFRS 13? This is what you are seeing on your screen. That is everything you have to put in your head and explain to the examiner. Okay, so under level 1 input, it comprises of quoted price observable in an active market for identical assets and liabilities at the measurement date. Okay, so what does that supposed to mean? Can you see now? Quoted price. Okay, so if I want to estimate the fair value of my phone, for example, how much are they selling it? How much is the quoted price? I'm sure some of you, if you enter some supermarket or you enter some warehouse or showroom, they are fixed price, like the prices are quoted. You can't negotiate it. Okay, so quoted price provide the most reliable evidence of fair value. So when you are making your fair value measurement, or when you're estimating your fair value measurement, all you need to do is to look at level one input. Do I have, is this asset quoted in an active market? What do you mean by active market? Market that is active, okay? So that's an active market, right? Okay, but I'm sure you know what active market is. That means market that, operates almost every day or every time, right? So now, so you are going to look at the quoted price in those markets so that you can estimate the fair value of your asset. So that's what we call level one input. Can I tell you one gist? This is simply what we call a market-based approach. Can you remember where we talked about the selling price, recent sales price? So that's a market-based approach. Okay, that's level one input. So that one will also assist the entity in determining the fair value. And the level two input is their observable input, other than those included in level one. Okay, for example, they are quoted prices for similar assets in an active market. So what do you mean by that? Quoted prices for similar items. For example, I want to fair value my Toyota Corolla, okay, but the Toyota Corolla, there is no quoted price. That means under my level one, there is no quoted price for Toyota Corolla in an active market. Then I can now come to level two and I will say, what is the price of the similar asset? So instead of using, because Toyota Corolla price is not available, I can now say, okay, what is the similar asset? Maybe Toyota Camry. I'm just giving you an example so that you can relate with all these, what's it called? Accounting jargon that you are seeing over there. Okay, so I'm just trying to calm down so that you can relate with it. So if I cannot see Toyota Corolla in an active market, which is within my level one input, I'll now come to level two input. I'll now look for a quoted price for a similar asset. So that one can give me an idea of my fair value. If I don't also see that one, I will say quoted price for identical asset in a less active market. Maybe that means also an identical or similar asset in a less active market. I will first consider quoted price in similar of a similar asset in an active market. Then in a less active market, they will now look for observable inputs that are not prices, such as interest rates. Okay, because those ones are not they are not prices, they are just interest rates. So for example, finance house A, how much interest rate are they charging? So that one might tell me the prevailing economic interest rate. Okay, so if I don't have level one input, I don't have information on level two input, I will now go to level three input. Okay, so if you look at that level two input, what does that tell you? Simply telling me my replacement cost. That's my cost approach. Okay, now I now go to level three input. Those are the unobservable inputs. Sorry, unobservable input for asset or liability based on the best information available. So in this case, the entity, we have to estimate what's it called? Financial forecast. Can you remember? Can you remember that valuation technique when we talk about income approach? Okay, so technically level three input is talking about income approach. Okay, so entity will now use its own data to try to estimate the fair value. Okay, so that's what I mean by level three observable input for asset or liability. So in that case, so the summary of everything is this: priority. Now that baklava question that we did. Okay, so you can see, I'm sure you now understand better now with this information. Okay, because they are trying to fair value their property using their own data. Okay, meanwhile, priority is given to level one input. Then the lowest priority is given to level three input. So you have to look at level one input, look at level two input, then before you can even come to level three input. If they are not information, because sometimes some assets are quite difficult to fair value, probably because there is no reference market. That's when you can now come to level three input. Okay, so that is the art of IFRS 13. If you get that correctly, then that is fine. Okay, so valuation technique, we have already talked about it. This is just further explanation. Okay, so let's now look at specific application. Then we'll say bye bye to IFRS 13. Okay, so now for a non-financial asset, okay, I'm already thinking the examiner will bother you around this area. Okay, what they can bother you on is those valuation technique and the fair value hierarchy. Okay, So, and I think well, I think they have tested it if I'm correct. Okay, you can see those questions uh, in your under your assignment. The way examiner can test IFRS 13. Maths, they will ask you what's principle contained in IFRS 13. What are the principles? You just talked about the fair value hierarchy. That's what they're asking for. Okay, so let's look at this. But just in case they ask you something around this area, okay. So let's see. Here, what they are trying to say is, anytime you are measuring non-financial assets, such as your PPE and your intangible assets, you are going to base it upon the highest and best use of that asset. So what is the highest and best use? That one will give us an idea of the fair value. Okay, and the highest and best use, when you are trying to do that, you have to take into consideration the physical possibility. It has to be physically possible. Okay, the highest and best use you take into account uses that are, so those uses must take into account those uses must be that they are physically possible. Okay, they are legally permissible and they are financially feasible. Physically possible, legally permissible, and financially feasible. Okay, so what does that supposed to mean? So when you say physically possible, okay, that means there is no really restriction to the asset. Legally permissible, that means you have assessed it and what's it called? There is no any restrictions as it comes to the legal aspect. Okay, then financially feasible, of course, the cost or the amount can also be estimated reliably. Okay, so that's what that one means. Okay, so if you look at this example here, because of time, I will not read it, but let me just tell you, let me just try to illustrate what is here. So here, an entity acquires a land in business combination. So they are trying to look at the fair value because in accordance with IFRS 3, they have to measure it, at fair value at the date of acquisition. So where they are getting that land from, okay, where they are getting the land from, they notice that some lands were used for industrial estates, whereas some are used for residential. Some are used for industrial, that means for companies. Then some are used for residential. So the question is, should we base our fair value estimate on the fair value if you want to use that land for an industry, or as an residential, as a place where you live? Okay, so that's the concern. But IFRS 13 is saying anytime you are doing that, okay, it has to be the highest and best use. So when you want to now do your fair value, you now consider which one do they use it for the most. Okay, what do they use it for most? For example, maybe land that were sold for land that will be that will be sold for the use of residential might be, maybe let's say 5 million. Okay, I'm just giving an example. Okay, and the one that will be sold for the ones you want to build industry on might be 10 million. So you now look at that area. What did they use land for there around that area? What's the highest and best use? So on that, you cannot base your fair value. Okay, so that's what that story is talking about. Like I said, the examiner might not necessarily bother you about that. So the same thing with research and development projects. So you can just read those stories. Okay, now let me just quickly make one or two comments here as well. Okay, this is liability and equity instrument. If you remember, when we defined what's it called, fair value, we said fair value is the price that we receive to sell an asset or paid to transfer a liability. So it's not only fair value, it's not only asset that you're looking for the fair value or you're trying to estimate the fair value, you're also doing that for your what's it called, liability or equity instrument. So what is here is, no, ideally when you are estimating your liability, you must consider the risk. Okay, that's the risk of default or non-performance. That's what this story is saying. Okay, it's just an explanation. So that means you might need to either compound or to discount to present value, as the case may be. So anytime you are doing your, okay, let me see what I was trying to explain. Can you see? Okay, I think it's somewhere here. Note that any fair value measurement of liability should include non-performance and default risk. That's just the heart. So in that case, they will give you the percentage that you're going to use to either compound or to discount. Okay, and you also agree with me that the reason why you are considering default risk is because it's also going to be dependent on whether the loan is a secured loan or unsecured loan. A loan is secured if it's backed up by collateral, and a loan is not secured if otherwise. Okay, so what's it called, the cost of capital that you're using will vary in those situations. Okay, so that's what those story is talking about. So you can see one question there. Okay, you can see one question there. Okay, let's see whether we can look at this question. Let me see. Okay, 5 quarters has purchased 100% ordinary share of 3 halves and is trying to determine the fair value of the net asset at the acquisition date. 3 halves owns a land that is currently developed for industrial use. That's just what I've explained. Okay, that is it. And the fair value for the land, if used for manufacturing operation, is 5 million. Okay, so that statement is key. Okay, now that said, many hereby plot of land have been developed for residential use. Okay, many hereby plot of land has been developed for residential use, but the land that they currently have is for industrial use. Okay, and the fair value if the land is, if used for manufacturing operation, is 5 million. So the land owned by 3 halves does not have any planning permission for residential use. Can you see? You know, we said IFRS 13 says it has to be the highest and best use, and it has to be physically possible, legally permissible, and financially feasible. That's what you're applying here. Okay, although the permission has been granted for similar plot of land. So the fair value of 3 halves land in a vacant site for residential development is 6 million. However, transformation cost is 3 million, and we need to be incurred to get the land into this condition. How should the fair value of the land be determined? So the question is, should we use it? Should we base it on this 5 million, or should we base it on this 6 million less this what's it called? Transformation cost. Okay, it's not transport, what's it called, transaction cost, transformation cost. Okay, so all we need to do is, what is the highest and best use. Okay, so they said many plot of land has been developed in the residential, okay, as high-rise apartment buildings. So the landowners, the land owned by 3 halves does not have planning permission of residential use, although permission has been granted for similar. So the fair value of the 3 halves at the vacant site of residential is this. So this is actually because they said here many hereby plot of land has been developed for residential use. So which means even though they might be planning for manufacturing, okay, so obviously this is the highest and best use. So all we need to do is to look at this 6 million, remove this 0.3 million, then we have 5.7, and that is the fair. But that is it. It's as simple as that. So that is what you're explaining to the examiner. So let's see whether we get it correctly. Okay, let's see whether we get it correctly. Okay, because I think in the other class I didn't even, most of these questions I don't have time to check them. But you know, once you know the principle, you can attack any question. So let's find out. Land is a non-financial asset, of course. IFRS 16 says that the fair value of a non-financial asset should be based on its highest and best use. So this is presumed to be the current use unless evidence exists contrary. So the current use of the asset will suggest fair value of 5 million. You know, we said it earlier, if it's going to be used for manufacturing. However, there's evidence that the market participants will be interested in developing the land for residential use, even for the nearby plot of land. So residential use of land is not legally prohibited. So similar plot of land has been used to grant permission. So it's likely that this particular plot of land, they will also get a planning commission. So if used for residential purpose, the fair value would now be 5.7 million. That's what we said, right? So it to be seen that the land highest and best use for residential development is the fair value. So that's it. Okay. So IFRS 13 is quite straightforward and it's very simple. All you need to do is to understand the concept. Okay. So problems with fair value. So you might need to also know this. Okay. Number one, sometimes there may not be active market for some kinds of assets. Okay. There might not be active market. In fact, under IAS 38, when we do it, intangible assets, you can only use revaluation model if there is a reference to an active market, and if in that market homogeneous goods are sold and if the price is available to the public. Don't worry, when we get to our statement, we're going to talk about that. Okay, so but that's one of the problems with fair value. Another one is it anticipates sales and profit. You know, sometimes it may never happen. We are just trying to say that we want to sell the asset, but eventually we are not really selling. Okay, because what we are doing is what will be the amount if we want to sell, but we are not actually selling. So it anticipates sales and profit just for a fun of it. Then market values can also move up and down. Okay, that's why in that definition they said at the measurement date. There has to be a date. So the fair value yesterday might not be the fair value today. So that's another problem. Okay, and that is the end of IFRS 13. So you have one or two questions there. Then you can go ahead and practice as your assignment. And so that if you have questions, you feel free to ask me. Okay. So at your level, all you need to know is what is fair value. Okay. You must also know the valuation technique. Okay. So I spent time to explain all those valuation technique properly. And the next one is the fair value hierarchy when you have level 1, level 2, and level 3. And the last one is the specific application. Okay, when we said for a non-financial asset, the fair value should be based on the highest and best use of that asset. And it has to be physically possible, legally permissible, and financially feasible. Okay, and we also looked at market, if you remember. So we said market is divided into, can I remember? Market is divided into the principal market and the most advantageous market. So principal market is the market with the greatest level of activity. So in that market, we ignore transaction costs. So where there are no principal markets, we now look for the most advantageous market. So the most advantageous market is the market that maximizes the net amount that will be received in selling an asset or minimizes the amount that will be paid when you are transferring a liability. So in that market, you can, what's it called, transaction costs might be might play a role, but they are not adjusted for when it comes to the the final figure for the fair value. Okay, and that is the end of IFRS 13. So let's now see. Let's go to the next standard. Let's go to the next standard. Let's find out. Okay, so did I pick the right one? Oh, fine. Okay, so we are moving. Okay, so IS 37. Okay, so let's try whether we can complete IS 37 today. So that tomorrow we start PPE. There's no way you want to write financial reporting exams and you don't know IS 16. It's not possible. It's not possible. You have to. So that's why we need to quickly look at it. Okay, so let's see. Okay, my hosts, can you confirm you can see my screen, IS37? I just want to be sure.
Yeah.
All right, thank you very, thank you very much. Thank you. All right. Okay. All right, so let's deal with this standard. IS 37 provisions. I will not rush you, okay? I wish we could finish. I think we should be able to finish. We still have more than 1 hour, but I will not rush you at the same time, okay? So, but if we don't finish, we complete it tomorrow, then we start IS 16, okay? Now, there is a standard that talks about provisioning, contingent liability, and contingent asset, okay? So let me see. What do you mean by provision? Okay, so you make provision. Sometimes I'm sure you've heard something like provision for bad debt, provision for doubtful debt. Okay, sometimes you have to make provision probably because you are not sure of the amount. Maybe even personally, you say, oh, let me keep this 5,000. Okay, because I may have some emergency. Okay, so that's provision. Okay, or you want to go to the market, especially the ladies, they want to go to the market, they have cost what they want to buy, tomato 20 naira, Maggi 10 naira, blah blah blah. You now say miscellaneous. Okay, that's provision. Okay, so they put certain amount there. Why are you doing that? You are doing that because you are not sure of the amount. Okay, you are not certain about the amount, and probably you are not also sure about the timing when that amount will occur, when that liability will crystallize. So you don't know. So that's why you are doing provision. So as per IAS 37, provision is a liability of uncertain timing or amount. Okay, so let me give you 1 second. If you want to jog, you want to jump off, you want to do anything, can you quickly do it before I enter into the spirit, before I start, explaining this, because I want to start now, right? So I needed you to understand the standard. It's quite simple, and the examiner keeps testing IAS 37, even in corporate reporting, both FR, financial reporting, and corporate reporting. So excuse me, let me just take water. So just stretch your leg, okay? Put water on your head. So I want to really understand it, okay? Okay. So we're ready, right? So I want to use all my strength to explain. Okay, so you understand. Now, there is a problem before the standard was issued. And the problem was what we call window dressing. If I'm correct, we have taken window dressing and creative accounting. Okay, we say window dressing is a situation whereby you go to the market, you buy cotton, you give it to a tailor, then you put it on your window. So that's window dressing. Okay, you're on your own. That's not window dressing, really. So, okay, let me try. Is it okay like that? Please confirm if it's okay. You said I should minimize. So Michael, is it okay? I've minimized. Okay, so I want to believe it's okay now, right? Okay. So now I was saying something. Before the standard, there was a problem, and the problem is okay. So it's much better. Okay, let me further reduce it. Okay, and the problem is this. You know, entities use or company. You're a chartered accountant, right? Or you have to be chartered. Okay, so you need to understand this concept. So when I lecture, I don't lecture you to just go there and pass the exam. So after passing the exam, what next? Can you really, talk about these standards and interviews, and the like? So you should understand the reason why uh those standards are are there. Okay, now there's something we call, that's before IAS 37. Although even with IAS 37, some companies they still do it because they must do window dressing. Okay, and who are the people doing those window dressing? Is you, the chartered accountant. Okay, because you know it. That's why you do it, right? Okay, I'm not doing it though. Okay, now there's something we call big bat accounting. Big bath. Okay, big, B-I-G. Then bath, when you bath, when you take your bath, right? B-A-T-H. So that's what we call big bath accounting. What does it mean? It simply means that in a year that a company is making profit, okay? In a year that you are making profit, you now create provision. When you create provision, you are simply reducing your profit and you now take it as part of your liability, okay? So that to reduce your profit for that year, because you're actually making a lot of profit. So you now use what we call big bat accounting. You are doing what we call profit smoothing. So you reduce your profit for that year so that in the years that you are now making losses or you are not making too much profit, you now begin to release it into your performance statement. That's your income statement. That's what they call big bat accounting. So that's why IAS 37 now came on board to say that when can an entity make provision? And if you are making provision, how should it be measured? That is it. So we are going to look at that. Once we do that, we look at contingent liability, we check contingent asset. Those ones, they are pretty straightforward. Those ones does not require any calculation. It's just explanation. Okay, so it's just explanation. Okay? So please mute yourself. Don't disturb us, please. Okay. All right. So that is just explanation. When it comes to contingent, okay, I don't like all those underground talk. So just ensure your audio videos on mute so that you don't distract the class, please. Okay. So I was saying something, right? So when we look at contingent asset, contingent liability. Okay, I was saying they were pretty straightforward, just explanation. Then we now look at 5 applications, specific applications. Okay, we look at specific applications. I'm going to take you what happens to future repairs to assets. Okay, what happens to future operating losses? Am I to make provision? Okay, we're going to look at it. Then onerous contract. What is onerous contract? We're going to look at it. Structuring, provisioning, and environmental provision. And that's the end of IS 37. But we still have some principles to learn. Okay. So according to IS 37, provision is a liability of uncertain timing or amount. You need to put that in your head. Okay. Now, if you remember, when we did elements of financial statement, okay, if you remember, we have 5 elements of financial statement. We have assets, liability, equity, income, and expenses. And if you remember that day, I spent a lot of time explaining assets and liability. If you remember, because I know most of the standard we're going to be dealing with will be dealing with assets. And at this level, you must know, I think I mentioned it to you, all standards that relate to assets. You must know them. That's why we started from IS 36, impairment of assets, IFRS 5, we went to borrowing costs, we went to IS 41, biological assets. Okay, so you have to know them. After now, we are looking at IS 16. From there, we go to intangible assets, we go to investment property. So you see the way they are being measured and classed in the financial statement. Okay, so it's very key. Okay, so when you are preparing, just make sure I told you, you must know all the standards that relate to assets. Okay, now we define liability as a present obligation as a result of past events, okay, that would lead to an outflow of economic benefits, or that would lead to an outflow of resources embodying economic benefit. That's the way we define liability. Now, look at provision. Provision is not saying it's a liability of uncertain timing or amount, okay? It has to be a liability of uncertain timing. Timing means we don't know whether we are paying it next month, whether next year, whether 3 years time. We don't really know, okay? That's what we call it uncertain timing. Then amount. How much are we going to pay? For example, our company has been sued, so we are in the law court. We are in the law court. Okay, we have been sued, so we don't know how much the judge is going to award against us. Okay, that's what we call uncertain amount. Timing. When will they award or when will they pass judgment? So we don't know. Okay, so it has to be a liability of uncertain timing or amount. Okay, so that's the technical definition. Okay, I've explained the reasons why IS 37 has to come on board. So one of the reasons is to regulate when and how entities should make provision. When do you make provision? Those are the recognition criteria. How do you do it? Okay, or how do you measure it? That's the measurement criteria, and that is where we are going to now. So you have to deal with me now. Put me on speaker now, okay? If you have not been listening to what I've been saying as regards IS 37, then you need to listen to me now. Before an entity can recognize provision, 3 conditions must be met. I have told you that entities, most companies, they use provision as window dressing. They use it to manipulate their reported profit because they can simply create provision and take it as a liability. Then in the year they are making losses, they will now begin to release it. That is window dressing, okay? Or sometimes it could also fall under creative accounting, okay? But that's why IS 37 is now saying before you can recognize provision, 3 things must be done. So if you are an external auditor and you go to your client's office, you are reviewing their financial statement. When you open all the financial statement that they have prepared, you now recognize that you saw provisioning in the account. then you need to ask 3 questions. You need to find out whether they have met those criteria. 3 conditions must be met at the reporting date. What do you mean by reporting date? I made emphasis on reporting date when we did IAS 10. If you can remember, events after the reporting period. We said events after the reporting period are those events, both favorable and unfavorable, that occur between the end of the reporting period or reporting date, but before financial statements are authorized for issue. And we said we have 2 types of events, adjusting events and non-adjusting events. I'm just using that as an opportunity. You know, anytime I'm explaining and I come across another standard, I will use it as an opportunity to revise so that you can remember again. Okay, so the reporting period or reporting date or the balance sheet date for an accounting year of January to December is December 31. So this is what you need to understand. So at December 31, 3 conditions must be met before I can recognize provision. If I meet 2 of those conditions, I cannot recognize provisioning. Okay, I cannot create provision. If I meet 1 out of the 3, I cannot create provision. If I meet none, obviously I cannot create provision. If I also meet 2, I cannot. 3 of them must be met. It is not on the screen. I'm deliberating, I'm not putting it on the screen. Why? So that I can explain. I don't want to be limited with the content on the screen. So I needed to explain and express myself. Now, I think I've told you earlier that even most times when I appear in class, I don't even have a note, okay? The only reason why I have a note is probably because of the question that I want to solve, okay? Because so that we can quickly move, okay? So that I can explain. Now, 3 conditions is in your notes. Those are the recognition criteria, and you need to be with me here. I rather prefer that I spend a lot of time explaining the principle so that when we get to the question, we will not use 5 minutes. Can you see? Most of the questions we've been solving, no matter how big that question is, if you have the principle in your memory, you will navigate immediately because you understood the principle. And I've also told you that when you are approaching financial reporting question, you don't solve it the way you want or the way you feel it should be solved. You have to make reference to the manual. You have to go back to the basics. And what is the manual? That's the accounting standard. That's why they call it standard. So if you don't understand that standard, you cannot solve any question. So you need to understand. So we have 3 conditions. Number 1, there must be present obligation, legal or constructive, as a result of past events. Number 2, an outflow of resources is required to settle the obligation, okay? An outflow of resources will be required to settle the obligation. And number 3, the cost of the obligation can be measured.
Yes, I'm already.
Yourself on mute, please. Ah, God. Please put yourself on mute, please. My host, please. Let me mute this student. Okay. You might talk from the background, but ensure your audio is on mute, please, so that don't distract the class. That's why we gave that rule, so that everybody is on mute. Can you see now? A lot of students were agitating that they want to talk in class. You can't really be talking because the background noises. That's why you say you should use the chat button if you have questions, okay? So that's a way it's entering into my head and it's just confusing everything. Okay, so let me try and come back. So what we're saying is this, that 3 conditions must be met. I'm going to break down those conditions because these are the conditions we are going to see, okay, when we are solving questions. We are asking ourselves, are those conditions met? Now listen to me, even if it is required by the law, even if it's required by the law for you to make provision, you have to check if those 3 conditions are met. If they are not met, even if it's required by the law, you cannot make provision. So I'm going to explain to you. If it's the only thing we're going to do tonight, and you put it in your head and you understood, I'm fine, I'm happy, okay? Because that's why we are here. You need to understand and you need to go into that exam and kill that paper, okay? So what do we do here? So anytime the examiner is testing IS-37, it's just one-way traffic. It's just one-way traffic. So you need to understand. It's quite simple. Once you know that principle, Even if you have not come across that question before, you'll be able to navigate because you understood the principle. So there are 3 conditions that will be met. So let me quickly take it again, then I will now explain. Number 1, there must be present obligation, legal or constructive, as a result of past events. That's the obligating event. Number 2, an outflow of resources will be required to settle the obligation. And number 3, the cost of obligation can be measured reliably. Once those 3 conditions has been met, then I can go ahead and create provision or recognize provision. So let me now explain those 3 concepts to you, or those 3 recognition criteria. You know, number 1, we said there must be present obligation. Okay, so that means there must be present obligation. Now, as at December 31, there must be present obligation as a result of past events. There must be present obligation. Now, listen, that present obligation is either going to be a legal obligation or a constructive obligation. What is a legal obligation? Now, before I explain that, what we mean by present obligation? That means I cannot recognize future obligation. That is the meaning. So if I told you that I'm going to owe you money, I have not owe you that money, I cannot recognize provisioning. So it has to be present obligation, which can be legal or constructive. So what do you mean by legal obligation? It simply means I have entered into an enforceable contract with one party to say I am committing myself to pay this liability. Or for example, I have signed an agreement to supply you some goods or services. Okay, so that is the legal obligation. That's what I mean by legal, and it's enforceable at law. What do you mean by constructive obligation? Constructive simply means what the entity has been doing in the past. Okay, that is as a result of the past pattern of practice of the entity. For example, if you are selling phones, and you always repair people's phone that got damaged or that has fault within 3 months. So that means if you sell phone to your customer and if they return it within 3 months, maybe it has one defect or the other, and you repair it for them for free without collecting money. So because you have been doing it over time, so it has become a constructive obligation. Okay, so that is as a result of the past pattern of practice. Look at FCA, for example. Before now, even as of now, we normally hold free lectures on WhatsApp and on Telegram. Okay, so there was a point when we started what's it called, the full tuitionals. Okay, so some people now say, hey, are we going to be able to combine both together, going to the classes Saturdays and Sunday, and at the same time holding lectures for free Mondays to Friday? So we are considering canceling it. Somebody now said we cannot cancel it. Why? Because we have created a constructive obligation. It is something we have been doing in the past, and people will expect us to continue to do it, and that's how we continue it. So that's how you can understand what we call a constructive obligation. So if a question is before me, I am asking myself, is there a present obligation? Yes. How will I know there's a present obligation? It's either a legal obligation or is a constructive obligation. I'm not done yet. As a result of past events. So it has to be something that has occurred in the past, not a liability that will occur in the future. And that is what we call obligating events. So what do we mean by obligating events? Obligating events are those events that gives an entity no realistic alternative than to settle the obligation. What does that supposed to mean? It simply means that you cannot avoid the obligation. You cannot avoid the liability. You have to pay. You have to pay the liability. That's what I mean by obligating event. Now listen. You know, I said something earlier that even if it is required by the law, you may not recognize provision. For example, if the law requires that you fix certain components on your maybe on your company or whatever, okay, and you can avoid it, then you will not recognize provision because it has to be an obligating event. If you understand this principle, then we are good to go. Okay, so once you read the question and you assess and it's saying that the entity can avoid that provisioning, then you can avoid that liability, then you cannot create a provision because it has to be a present obligation, okay, legal or constructive, as a result of past event. That is obligating event. That's an event that gives an entity no realistic alternative than to settle the obligation. Then number two, an outflow of resources will be required to settle the obligation. Of course, resources is usually in cash, okay? And the cost of the obligation can be measured reliably. So once those three conditions are met, then you go ahead and recognize your provision. So everything I've explained is here. Can you see? Okay, so I don't just like looking at those notes when I'm explaining, so that's why. Okay, so you can see them there. All right. So the examiner can also ask you to explain what I've just said. That's it. 5 marks. You get it for free. Then you move on. So you have to put it in your head. All right, from now. Okay, all right, from now. So the next thing is measurement criteria. Can you see? That's it. I'm spending time to explain principle. That is my technique, because I've realized that most problem of students is not that they are dull. It's not that's if you have written FR before and you fail, it's not as if you are dull. No, it's because you don't understand the principle. That is it. The day you understood the principle, I'm sure some of you now, if you have been following this class, you would have realized why you fail some paper. If you have done financial reporting before, you have by now you should have realized why you failed that paper. Maybe you wrote May 2019, or maybe you wrote it last 2 years or 3 years ago. By now, if you are actually following the class, if I had this lecture that time, I would have passed this FRO. Oh, so this is the question I cannot solve that time. I'm sure some of you would have been in that position. So what simply means at that time is because you don't understand the principle. Okay. After recognition criteria, I've already told you, if you are looking at standards, you look at 4 things. Technical definition, we have done it. We said provision is a liability of uncertain timing or amount. Number 2, you look at recognition criteria. We have done it. That's why we talked about those 3 criteria that must be met at the reporting date. And number 3 is the measurement criteria. That's what we want to do now. So how do you now measure provision? And that's all on provision. Then we now go to contingent asset liability. Then I'll now come back to those 5 specific applications. That is all. Then we are done. That's it. And the examiner keeps this particular standard diet in, diet out. Even in corporate reporting, it's a quite corporate reporting, because it's something that is so material. It's when it comes to financial statement, the standard that entities easily manipulate. Now, when you come to measurement, provisions are measured, okay, at the best estimate of the expenditure that is required to settle the obligation. Okay, so IAS 37 requires that you measure provisions at the best estimate of the expenditure that is required to settle the obligation. So you need to also put that in your head. So what do we mean by best estimate? So the best estimate is the most likely amount payable for a single the most likely amount. It's an estimate. Don't forget, it's an estimate, because we already say it's a liability of uncertain timing and amount. Okay, so it has to be measured at the best estimate of the expenditure required to settle the obligation. Okay, it has to be measured at the best estimate of the expenditure required to settle the obligation. So the best estimate is that for a single obligation, what is the most likely amount paid? For example, court case. Okay, one of your customers has sued your company. So what is the likely amount we are going to pay? So you are going to estimate it. Okay, then an expected value for a large population of items. So what will be the expected value, for example, for a warranty provision? So you are going to calculate the expected value. For example, you sold phones to 100 customers, and you're expecting that some of them might return the phone. That's what we call warranty, because you gave them 1 year warranty. So if that phone should get technical faults within that 1 year and they return it, you're going to do it for free. So in that case, you can create provision, provided those 3 conditions are met. Don't forget. But when you are not doing your provision, you not measure it. So for a large population of items, it has to be the expected value. For a single obligation, it has to be the most likely amount payable. So when you are now doing both measurements, they have to be discounted to present value. That's it. They have to be discounted to present value. Don't forget, provision is in the future. Okay, I'm trying to say, oh, I might pay this amount might crystallize. Okay, it's in the future. So when I want to recognize it, once it's material, okay, once it's material, you're going to discount to present value. Okay, so that's what you have there on your screen. Okay, so that's what you have there on your screen. So everything I've explained is there. So let's look at this exercise. Don't expect this kind of question in your exam, right? Don't expect it. I'm just using. Well, anyway, it can come out, but it's quite the probability is quite low. But we just want to use this exam to this question to brush up our understanding before we now go to complex question. I like us learning a principle, then we apply it in a question. So let's look at this question. Okay, Clean sells domestic appliance such as washing machines. Okay, on 1st December 2021, Clean decide to start selling washing machines with a warranty. Okay, under the terms of the warranty, Clean will repair washing machines at no charge to the customer if they break within the warranty period. Okay, that's interesting. The entity estimates, based on past correspondence with customers, that 20% of the washing machines sold will require repair within the warranty period at an average cost of 50 naira per machine. Clean sold 200 washing machine as at December 31, 2021. The time value of money should be ignored. That means they don't want us to discount. Okay, so that's why they are not giving us. So now say require. Calculate the warranty provision required. Okay, they said we should calculate the warranty provision required. So if you look at this question, obviously the examiner already told us they have met those conditions. Okay, they have met those conditions, but I can also find out if they have actually met this condition. So if the examiner is saying calculate warranty provision, of course they are talking about IS-37 because provision is there. So how will I know that they have met those conditions? What's number one condition? There must be present obligation. Abi, there must be present obligation. That's legal or constructive as a result of past event. So because we have already sold, okay, because they said Clean sold washing machine. So we have sold. So we have created a legal obligation because they told us here that under the terms of the warranty, Clean will repair. That is legal. So that is a legal obligation. Okay. So how do we now measure it? We are now going to measure it at the best estimate of the expenditure required to settle the obligation. And the best estimate for a single transaction is the most the most amount that is going to be payable for a single transaction. So all I need to do is this. How many did you sold? We sold 200. How much is the cost? We sold 50 naira per one. So I'll say 200 multiplied by 50 naira. I'll get a price, and we are told that here that 20% might require repair. So I'll now apply 20% on that amount. Okay. So and that's the answer. Is that what they did? Yeah. Can you see? That's it. All right. So 200 machines multiplied by 20% multiplied by 50. So that gives you to 2000. Like I said, you don't really expect this kind of question in the exam. Okay. So it's just to make you to understand. Can you see? That's the way you answer questions. Okay. A provision is required. Then you go ahead and explain to the examiner why a provision is required. Then you now do the best estimate. So let's look at subsequent measurements. Of course, the kind amount of your provision will be increased, okay, by the finance cost. Okay, I think you are familiar with this under lists. Can you remember? Okay, so and you also credit your provision. So that's just it. So if a provision has been discounted to the present value, then the discount must be unwound. What do you mean by unwinding of discount? Okay, don't worry. Don't let me bother you too much because we have so many things to learn here. So when we do IS 16, we talk about unwinding of discount. When you do your group accounting, we also talk about unwinding of discount. In fact, I'm even thinking of writing an article on unwinding of discount, the concept of unwinding of discount. What does it really mean? Okay, so it's a future value. So we now take it to present value. So we need to unwind. That means we need to start releasing it until we get to that figure into the future. Okay, so you have to debit your finance cost and credit your provision. Okay, so that is it. Okay, so at what point do you derecognize? Okay, ISSM says that provision should be used only for the expenditure that relates to the matter for which it was originally recognized. So if you recognize provision for court case, you have to use it for that court case. And in that court case now, one way or the other, turn around to be your favor, you're not paying again, and you have to write it back. That's the recognition. Okay. So after the reporting, a provision should be reversed if it's no longer probable that the outflow of economic benefit will be required. So that's just that. So you don't need to bother yourself. Now, when it comes to provision and creative accounting, I think I've explained that. Remember, okay? So you can read all those ones there so that you can understand. Okay, so let's now quickly look at contingent liabilities and contingent assets. Like I said, it's pretty straightforward. Now, be with me here. It's quite straightforward. I'm sure you know what is liability. Liability is a present obligation arising from past events. That means you are certain about it. Okay? But when we say contingent simply means it's dependent on a condition that is not within the control of an entity. That is it. So before that liability can crystallize, or before the liability can become a liability, or before the obligation can become a liability, there are some certain conditions. Okay, that's what they call it, contingent liability. So according to the standard, a contingent liability is defined as a possible, can you see? It's different from a present obligation. So this is a possible obligation arising from past events and whose existence will be confirmed only by an outcome of one or more uncertain future events not within the control of an entity. It's also a present obligation that arises from past events but does not meet the criteria for recognition as provision. So when it comes to contingent liability, you don't recognize, okay? You don't recognize, okay? So when but you can disclose. You can only disclose it, okay? So you can have three scenarios, whether it is probable, it is possible, or it is remote. So if a contingent liability is remote, you ignore. You don't do anything, okay? If a contingent liability is possible, you might consider to disclose. And if it's also probable, you can disclose or recognize as the case may be if it has met the criteria. Okay, so that's what you have there. So examples of contingent liability is a pending court case. Okay, it's a contingent liability maybe shortly before the year end, one of your customers sued you. Okay, so by the time you are preparing your account, the court has not passed any judgment. So you check those three criteria. If they are met, then you can go ahead and recognize provision. Warranty provisions is also because you don't know whether it will crystallize. So it's an example. It might be an example. Sometimes warranty provision might be an example of a contingent liability because you're not really too sure. And sometimes it could fall under provisioning itself. Okay, the income tax dispute, we are not really too sure. Okay, financial guarantee giving. Okay, how many of you here have signed for somebody that got a job with a bank? Okay, and they gave a guarantee form to you to sign. So if the person is still in that bank, so you be the one that will pay. That's what I mean by financial guarantee. That's one of financial guarantee. So it also happens. So entity also can also do financial guarantee. Okay, maybe for themselves or for any other party. So it could also be under a contingent liability because we are not sure, because it's going to be dependent on one or two uncertain future events. So that's why they call it contingent liability. So don't forget, you don't provide for contingent liability. You only disclose as a note. So if it is remote, you ignore. Okay. If it is probable or if it is possible, you disclose. If it is probable, you can disclose, or sometimes you have to check whether you can also provide, provided it has now turned into a liability itself. Okay, then what is contingent asset? Obviously it's the opposite of contingent liability, but don't tell the examiner That contingent asset is the opposite of contingent liability. So that one is a possible liability, okay? A contingent asset is a possible asset. It's just the same definition, just that you are changing liability to asset. So the possible asset that arise from past events whose existence will also be confirmed by one or two or certain future events which is not within the control of an entity. So a contingent asset is not recognized, okay? If it is remote, you ignore. If it is possible, you also ignore contingent asset. It is only when it is probable. That's when you now disclose, okay? So a contingent asset should be disclosed if the future inflow is probable. Can you see now? It is flow. If future inflow is virtually certain, then it ceases to be a contingent asset. So to now be recognized as a normal asset. So what do you mean by virtually certain? Obviously, virtually certain simply is sure, okay? It is now a real asset. So in that case, you are going to recognize it as a normal asset, okay? So example of contingent asset is just pending court case in favor of the entity. So you are the one that is suing you are the one that is suing a company now, okay? You are the one that sues a company. So you are expecting damages to be paid to you, but you're not sure. You are not even sure of the amount, okay? At most you can do is to recognize. So that is it. So the examiner can frame a scenario-based question on how this area should be handled or should be handled, okay? So you may not really send a calculation around this area. You're just explaining, you're applying the principle in a scenario based question, okay? So you have problems with IS 37. So I've explained a lot of them when I was talking, so you can just go through them when you are doing your revision, okay? So that is it. That's the whole of IS 37, okay? So the next thing we are now looking at is those 5 specific applications. So I want you to be with me now. So we'll be solving questions here. Then we'll now solve a bigger question. I still want to hope we'll be able to finish. But if we don't finish, that's not a problem. So let's look at the first one. Okay. The first one is future operating losses. Okay. Future operating losses. Let me find out something. Okay, it's there. Okay. It was supposed to be future operating losses, future repairs to assets. So I was wondering why onerous contract was there. So I've seen future. Okay, so most time I don't have time to check all this material. Okay, but I know what I want to take you guys. So I know the content of those standards. Okay, so let's find out. So what do you mean by future operating losses? You're anticipating that your what's it called? One of your business operations, maybe your subsidiary or your operation is going to make loss. Okay, that's what they call future operating losses. So you now want to provide, you now want to make provision for future operating loss. So the question is, can you go ahead? Okay, can you go ahead and make provision for a business that is about to make a loss? That's the question. I told you something earlier that don't think about it. You have to apply the standard. So you can say, yes, now, maybe I'm anticipating that my business is going to make loss, then I can go ahead and make provision. No, you have to look at the standard. What is the standard saying? The standard says, before I can make provision, 3 things must happen. There must be present obligation. And this one is a future operating loss. Is there any present obligation? Which has to be legal or constructive as a result of past event. Do you remember we explained past event? We called it obligating event. What is obligating event? That means it gives me no realistic alternative than to settle the obligation. So when a business is being anticipated to make loss, okay, so the question is it a present obligation? No, it relates to the future. Then I ask another question again. Do I have an obligating event? I don't have an obligating event because it's not even compulsory for me to make that loss. I can sell that operation or that business before it starts making loss. So it is not an obligating event. That's it. That's how you answer questions. All right. Okay. I'm not even seeing. Okay. Let me find out what they wrote here or what is written here. Okay, so I'm just explaining. When I see that word, that's it. Now, no provision should be made for future operation because they relate to the future rather than past event. That's it. Loss-making business could be closed and the losses can be avoided. Can you see? Obligating event is absent. Can you see? Meaning that there is no obligation to make the loss. An expected future operating loss is, however, an indication that the asset might have even been impaired. So an impairment review should now be conducted in accordance with that. That's it. So if you see a scenario-based question, the examiner is asking you, can future operating losses, can you make provision? You simply tell the examiner no, but don't say no and go out. So you have to explain why. And this is what you tell the examiner. Okay, so that's that. So we are done. We have done 1 out of 5. So we have 4 left. Okay. Onerous contract. Okay. What is onerous contract? Now, so the question is, can I make provision for onerous contract? Yes. Okay. But what is onerous contract? Is it onerous contract or onerous contract? Is it onerous or onerous? Just pick one, Jerry. Just at least it's onerous. It's own. Okay, fine. So just pick one, Jerry. So I'm not an English language student. So I'm a financial reporting student, right? So when it comes to IFI, yeah, fine. So okay, so what is onerous contract? It simply means that the unavoidable cost of fulfilling a contract, right, exceed the economic benefit. That's it. So if I have a contract that the money I'm going to spend is higher than the economic benefit, that's what we call onerous contract, and it happens in leases. Okay, we have done leases, right? So it happens in leases. So the question now is, can I make provision for onerous contract? Of course you can, but when you are making provision, it will then be measured. Okay, let me show you where it is so that you can highlight it in your, I think it's somewhere there. Okay, so that you can highlight it in your notes. So the provision is now measured at the lower of cost of fulfilling the contract and the cost of terminating the contract, including any penalty payment. Okay, so that's how you measure it. So you are going to look at, okay, if I want to fulfill the contract, what is the cost? Then if I want to terminate plus any penalty, what is the amount? So the lower of the two, I can go ahead and make a provision. Okay, I can go ahead, because if an entity has an onerous contract, a provision should be recognized for the present obligation under the contract. You already have a present obligation under the contract. You already have a contract to be paying your lease liability every year. Okay, but because the warehouse that you have leased, okay, you are not really making money. You now realize that the unavoidable cost of paying the rent, that's it, is the contract, has outweigh the economic benefit. That's the profit you are supposed to make. So it has become an onerous contract. So because of the present obligation you already have, so you can go ahead and recognize provision. So let's now look at future repairs to assets. Now you have to be with me here. This is the third one. Okay, this is the third one. Okay, I may not take you the other two, or if you have the time, I can also take you. But because I want you to digest this properly, so tomorrow or when next we are meeting, we just complete the other two. Then we solve one question. Then we move to our 16. Okay, so let's find out future repairs to assets. Now be with me here. Sometimes it's possible that you have some assets, okay, that you already have a particular pattern of repair. Okay, you already have a particular pattern of repair. Let me give you a classical example. Is it classical example or a classic example? Just speak on English. Okay, so whether classic example or classical example, shall pick one. Okay, now listen, be with me. Now look at airline industry or an airline company. They have aircraft, right? So those aircraft has a lot of components. That's what they call componentization as per IAS 16, because sometimes the aircraft itself might use let's say 50 or 100 years, the aircraft itself, but there are some components in the aircraft that are depreciated separately from the entire aircraft. That's what they call componentization. Okay, so now there are some certain components in the aircraft that after a certain time, maybe every 3 months, maybe every 1 year, maybe every 2 years, you must change them or you must repair them. As far as I know that the tire of an aircraft, okay, whether the tire as in normal car tire is only when the thing starts showing wear and tear symptoms. That's when you replace it. but it's not applicable to an airline or to an aircraft. Okay, it already has a cycle that the tire will use. So whether it's now showing a sign of wear and tear or not, it doesn't really matter. You must change it. Okay, so they keep watching or monitor the cycle or the landing and the takeoff of those aircraft. Okay, so that is an example of feature replacement or feature repairs to assets. So you already have a definite pattern, or you know that every 2 months, every 3 months, or every 1 year, you are going to replace or you are going to repair that particular asset. So the question, for example, in your office, maybe your air conditioning is being serviced, let's say, every 6 months. So it is definite. So the question is this: can I make provision? That's the question for future repairs to assets. Okay, I don't need to look at what is on the screen. You don't even need to look at your paper. All you need to ask yourself is this: future repairs to assets. Can I make provision? Then I look at my condition. There must be present obligation. Some people can argue that there is a present obligation. Okay, why is it a present obligation? I already bought the assets. Okay, and I needed to, go. I will now repair in the future. So that is not a present obligation. Okay, why? Because there is no obligating event. I can even sell the asset before the repair is due. That is the answer. That's it. I can avoid it. That's it. Once I can avoid it, I cannot create provision. So let's look at what we have here. Provision cannot normally be recognized for costs of future repairs or replacement parts. Even if the future expenditure is required by law, can you see that? The entity could sell the asset. Can you see? To avoid the expense, I can sell it. So once I can avoid it, I cannot create provision. So instead, the expenditure should be capitalized when incurred and depreciated over the useful life. So you cannot create provisioning. So we still talk about that more when we get to IAS 16. So let's look at this example. Okay, I will not bother you on the other two. That's the environmental provisioning and restructuring provision. So we take it off from there so that I will also use the opportunity, to re-emphasize on IAS 37. Okay, so let's look at this exercise 2. Danboy is a company that owns several shops, which has a year-end of 31 December 20x1. One of the shops is loss making, and at December 20x1, Danboy forecasts that the shop will make a loss of 50,000. Okay, at the year end 20x2. Okay, now on December 31, 20x1, Danboy closed down a different shop. At that date, there were still 3 years left to run on the shop lease. Lease rentals are 100 naira per annum. The landlord will allow Danboy to cancel the lease if he pays one-off fee of 200,000 required. Discuss the accounting treatment of the above in the financial statement as at the year end. Okay, so the examiner did not tell me that they are testing IAS 37. So how will I know? Okay, so they only told me that Danboy is a company that owns several shops, which has a year end of 31st December 2021. That's brilliant. Then in the second paragraph, I was now told that one of the shop is loss making. So when I see loss making, something is calling me onerous contract. Okay, onerous contract is calling me. No, sorry, is it onerous contract? No, it's not onerous contract. When you say loss making, that means what's it called? Future operating losses. Can you remember? Future operating losses under provisioning is calling me. Then I read the question again. I continue. At December 31, they now forecast that the shop will make a loss of 50,000 by 20x2. Don't forget, we are the reporting date. So those 3 conditions to recognize provisioning must be met. So this guy is now saying, he is now forecasting that the business will make a loss of 50,000 because those are the things that entities do. That's what they do to manipulate accounts. Okay, so the question now is, can I go ahead and make provision? No. I cannot make provision for future operating losses. Why? Because I do not have an obligating event. I can even sell the business before I start making loss. And this loss is also an indication that that business might have been impaired. So that's what you tell the examiner. Then I now go to the next one. The examiner is saying on 31st December 20x1, That boy now closed down a different shop. Okay, so that means they're not talking about this loss of operating, what's it called? The one that is making loss. They're not talking about that one because they already said it owns several shops. So it's now closed. That's how you have to apply your mind, okay? When you're reading question, you should be able to relate it together. So when you see this, it now said it closed down a different shop. So at that date, there were still 3 years left to run the shop. That is a lease, on lease, okay? So the lease rentals is 100 per annum. So when you see lease there, don't think automatically it is IFRS 16 they are testing. You have to think. That's why you need to understand standards, okay? So now lease rentals are 100 per annum, and I have 3 years left. That means I have 300,000, okay? And the landlord will allow that boy to cancel the lease if he's going to pay a one-off fee of 200. This is a type of onerous contract. Onerous contracts are those contracts in which the cost of fulfilling the contract, exceed the economic benefit, okay? So how do I measure it? I can create provision for my onerous contract. So how do I do that? That will be measured at the lower of cost of fulfilling a contract and cost of terminating the contract and any penalty payment. So what is the cost of fulfilling the contract? If I stay there for 3 years, I will pay how much? 100,000 per annum. That is 300,000. If I'm canceling, okay, what happens? So if I cancel the lease, how much will I pay? 200,000. So which one is the lower? 200,000 is the lower. So I can go ahead and create provision of 200,000. Okay, so that's what you have in your solution here. It's as simple as that. Okay, it's as simple as that. Then let's go to the next question. Let's go to the next question. Okay, an entity. Okay, let me see. Okay, an entity has a reporting date, okay, of 31st December 2007 and intends to repair an item of plant next year. Okay, can you see? The cost has been reliably estimated at the reporting date at 10,000. The repair is made in the following accounting period at the cost of 12,000. Required. What provision, if any, should be recognized in the financial statement? My class, you should be able to answer that question. An entity want to repair an asset in the future period, and they even recognize, they have reliably estimated it to be how much? 10,000 naira. Okay, so can I make provision? Obviously, no. You cannot make provision to future repairs your asset because you can even sell the asset before it is due. Okay, so let's find out. Is that it? Okay, can you see now? No provision should be made for fixed despite being probable and capable of being reliably measured. Can you see this? Because there is no obligation at the end. So the repairs of expenditure will have to be expensed. So that is it. That is it. So let's look at the last question. So I'm going to stop here today. So tomorrow I'll take environmental provisioning and restructuring. And that's the end of S37. Then we now look at one bigger question. Okay, so if you have your time, you can even look at that question before tomorrow. So that when I'm explaining, you just be smiling. Okay, or the little areas you don't understand how they come across those figures, I will explain them, then it will be clearer to you. Okay, so let's look at this last question before we go. Under the new legislation, an entity is required to fit smooth freighters to its factories by 31st December 2007. At the reporting date of 30th June 2007, the entity has not fitted the smooth freighters. Now, required, should a provision be made at the reporting date for the estimated cost of fitting the smooth filter? Okay, let me read that again. Okay, they said under a new legislation, okay, an entity is required, okay, so by law they are required to fit a smooth filter to its factory by December. Can you see? So in December, let's assume they are in June. Okay, wait. They said the reporting date is June 20x7. Okay, that's their reporting date. So they are preparing the account. So by that same December, their new accounting date will now start July 20x7. Okay, so by December, that means in 6 months' time, they must fit a smoke filters. So the entity has not fitted as the smoke filters as at the reporting date. So when preparing the account, can we make provision? No way. Even though it's required by the law, you cannot make provision. Okay, why can't I make provision? Because that business can be avoided. Okay, it's a future expenditure. Even beyond that, no obligation exists at the reporting date because I can avoid, I can sell that business, I can before that time that is going to be due. So if you look at the solution, no provision should be made for future expenditure despite being capable and reliably measured. There's no obligation to feed the filter. So that's it. So even though it's required by law, so don't say, it's a law. The law must prevail. No, you have to check whether those conditions has been complied with. Okay, so don't let me bother you. So let's stop here. But before I go, if you're asking for volume, it's not from me. You have to check your device because I'm using all my strength to talk. If you notice, sometimes I'm under. Although I try to put my AC, but my fan is working. I'm still sweating. Okay, and this place is quite cool. So if it's volume, obviously it's not from me. So if you notice, I normally ask my host to confirm that they can hear me before I start each lecture. Okay, so if it is volume, it's either you restart your device or you try to look at the volume of your phone or device from your hand. Okay, so let me see if I have any other question. Please tell your student to stop distracting the class. Is our student now? Are you not part of our student? Ms. Falashade. Okay. Sir, please explain the three conditions under provision. I was lost due to network. Okay. I think I've done that over and over. Maybe you've been able to capture that. So those three conditions, let me quickly recap again. So those three conditions is that must be present obligation. Okay. Legal or constructive as a result of past event. That's obligating event. And that was what I explained more. Okay, so that present obligation can be legal or constructive. So legal simply means you have already entered into a contract. Or for example, when you are selling, you make it known to your customer that if they bring those goods back within the period of warranty, you're going to do it for them for free. That's legal obligation. But for constructive obligation, it's as a result of your past pattern of practice. Something you have been doing, it might be for free. Okay, you have been doing it. For example, if they bring it back, you repair it for them for free. So you have created a constructive obligation because they already know you, for doing that. For example, if you enter into a bank, okay, if you enter into a bank, you will also always see water, free water at the dispenser. So you can go there and take the water. So the day the bank want to remove it, they will remember that we have created a constructive obligation. So because it's as a result of their past pattern of practice. And we also said as a result of past event, that past event is an obligating event. So you have to check whether we can avoid that obligation. If you can avoid the obligation, you cannot create provision. It has to be an obligating event. What do you mean by obligating event? It simply means it gives no realistic alternative than to settle the obligation. Okay, you cannot escape it. That's what I mean by obligating event. Okay, so that's what I mean by obligating event. And the second one is an outflow of resources required to settle the obligation. That's cash. And the last one is the cost can be measured reliably. So once those three conditions are met, then you can go ahead and recognize your provision. Okay, so that is the question. So I think I've answered that. Okay, there is no other question for me. So thank you for your time. So we are going to look at environmental provisioning and restructuring provisioning tomorrow. So after that, I think we should be able to do that within the next 15 to 20 minutes tomorrow by God's grace. And we now checked, we start IAS 16. IAS 16 is a very big standard. It's quite simple, but it's a big standard. It's one of the biggest standards. We may not even finish it. Maybe finish it next week by God's grace. Okay. So, but we needed to look at it as soon as now so that you understand so many things. So I'm also going to be showing you a fixed asset register. How does it look like? Okay. I think there's a question like that that we might need to solve. Okay. So I will see you tomorrow by God's grace. There's no other question. So enjoy your night rest and make sure you dream of financial reporting. All right.